Okay, good Erev Shabbos to everybody. Let's chazer ibo in the middle of a sugya and to understand what's going on. So the Mishnah had said, in order to be chayiv the carbon oil of v'yored, by color oil v'yored, it's for tumas mikdash gedashav. You needed to go ahead and have a yediyah in the beginning, halama in the middle, and a yediyah in the end. What about if you had a yediyah in the beginning and you never knew about it? You had an halama, and then you didn't have a yediyah. So the chatas that was nasa b'fnim, the seir that went inside of Yom Kippur was not mechapa for you. It put you in a state of a suspended animation until you found out. And when you found out, then you were being the oil of yari. Because when you found out, then it becomes yediyah, halama, yediyah. And that's what we said yesterday. Now, we wanted a source. How do you know that it's mechaper? How do you know that it's mechaper for that? So we brought in the following pasuk. This is the pasuk that we need for today's share. Okay, this is the pasuk we need for today's share. I don't know why it's not coming out. This is not good. Okay, let me see. Okay, now, okay, good. Now I have it. Okay. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumois b'nei Yisrael and pisheihem l'chol chatoisam v'chein yaseh la'oil moyed hashoichin itam b'soich tumasam. This is Tezayin. It's in this week's parsha, fellas. It's in this week's parsha. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumois b'nei Yisrael. So this is the limit of Rabbi Yehuda that we saw yesterday. It says that we wanted to know when it says Tumah b'nei Yisrael, which Tumah is this mechapa for? So it could be Gilei Arayis, it could be Shvichas Damim, it could be Avodah Zara. And it said that you mechaper for what? For Tumais, mi Tumais, but not all Tumah. Guys, mi Tumais, but not all Tumah. So which one is it? Which one is it? So just like you find that there's a special din by what? By Tumas Mikdash Gedashav, so too the Tumah over here is Tumas Mikdash Gedashav. That's the Memetzino of Rabbi Yehuda. You find that what? You find that just like the Tumah, you find that the unique, we're going to see that it brings an oil of Yored, so too, which is speaking Tumas Mikdash Gedashav, so too over here, so that's the Memetzino of Yehuda. The Chipar could be Tumah, it's not all Tumah, which one? The Tumah that's unique. What's the Tumah that's unique? Is the oil that you bring the oil of Yared, and that's by Tumas Mikdash Gedashav. So too, the Tumah over here is Tumas Mikdash Gedashav. Now, the question is, it says Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, you don't have to go to a Memetzino. Look at the pasuk. V'chiper al hakodesh mi Tumais, from Tumas Kodesh. In other words, within itself, you can figure it out, guys. V'chiper al hakodesh mi Tumais. From Tumas Kodesh, that's what this carbon is being brought for. You don't need the fancy Memetzino of Rabbi Yehuda. Plain Pashit Geret. It says in the pasuk, "L'chol chataysan." Okay, so now I have Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon where I know this din from, right? Where do I know it from? Whether I know it from a Memetzino or I know it from the pasuk itself. Okay, now what type of carbon are we speaking about? What type of situation are we speaking about? What type of situation are we speaking about? So what do we need, fellas? We need, you had a yediyah in the beginning with no yediyah in the end. That's what we need. In other words, it's a two-step process. Which tumah are we speaking about? And secondly, which scenario of chatas are we speaking about? Okay, so for that, we had the following. It says pishehem, which means mezid, and therefore we need chatos similar to mezid. Just like mezid does not bring a carbon, so too a case of chatos where you wouldn't bring a carbon. Guys, there's two possibilities. Either you're not bringing a carbon because you had a yediyah in the beginning and not in the end, or you didn't have a yediyah at all. For the Gemara, how do you know you don't need yediyah at all? So it says, for that we darshan the word chatoisam, something that will lead to a chatas. So just to reiterate outside, again, this is not it's a lot of words and not an easy Gemara. Here's our aim. Here's the aim, right? Here's my brackets, Dr. Press. You have, uh, how do you know that the carbon of Yom Kippur that's described in the pasuk we just had, Yud Tezayin v'chipar al kodesh mitumas b'nei Yisrael, is speaking about A, Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, and B, a scenario where you knew about it in the beginning and you didn't know in the end. So, how do you know it's Tumas? How do you know it's speaking about Tumas Mikdash Kedashav? Machloikis, Memetzino of Yehuda, or the pasuk itself of Rav Shimon. Right there, it says v'chipar al kodesh mitumas. How do you know it's speaking about Yediyah without? Okay, so now there you have to see. It says Pishehem. Pishay means amazed. Amazed does not bring a carbon. If you do something amazing, you're not bringing a carbon. So too, the scenario over there must be when you're not bringing a carbon. You're not bringing a carbon. There's two possibilities of not bringing a carbon. Either because I knew in the beginning and didn't know in the end, or I didn't know at all. How do you know it's the beginning and the end? Because it says Chatoisam. If you didn't know in the beginning, remember my rule of thumb? If you didn't know in the beginning, you could never bring a carbon, guys. Geschmack. You can never bring a carbon. So it has to be the scenario where you knew in the beginning with the possibility of bringing a carbon when you find out in the end. That's just the chazriba of what we did yesterday late, and I guess we didn't do. I when I went over today, I feel I didn't do a good job. Okay, Amamar. What does Amamar mean? We're going back over the Brisa now. Okay, initially, guys, what was the Brisa? We're on Zayin Amid Beis. We're about 4 lines off from the bottom, 5 lines off the bottom. Amamar, how do you know that this carbon is not speaking about Avodah Zarah, Gilei Arayos, Shvichas Damim? So we had Michatasam, we had a limud, right? What's the Havamina? Fellas, if you do Avodah Zarah b'shoigeg, b'mezid, what's the din? Come on, skila. What happens if you do it b'shoigeg? You bring a carbon. So how could you have a havamina that you need this Yom Kippur carbon to go ahead and be mechapef avodah zara? B'manavshach. You either carbon's not going to work, you got to die, or you have another carbon. You don't need the carbon of Yom Kippur. Now, what's the scenario? I'm going to go through each one. Avodah zara, shvichas damim, and gilei arayos. Says the Gemara. Amamar yeshli ba'inyan zel lehevi gimel tumos. It's possibility that this carbon of Yom Kippur can be mechapef for 3 tumas. Tumas avodah zara, tumas gilei arayos, tumas shvichas damim. Hi avodah zara, heichi dami. What exactly is the case of avodah zara? What exactly is the case of avodah zara? Okay. Again, which avodah zara? B'mezid. If you did it b'mezid, bar katolahu, you chayev misa. A carbon's not going to help you guys. You can bring 1,000,000 karbanis, you got to die. Forget your kapara. B'shoigeg, and if it's speaking b'shoigeg, bar carbon who? You're going to bring a carbon. You're going to bring a sira. You're going to bring a carbon. So you don't need a limud to teach me that what? In other words, you needed a limud to teach me speaking about Tumas Mikdash Kedashav and not avodah zara. What kind of havamina about avodah zara? You don't need the carbon of Yom Kippur. On that, the Gemara answers, no, maybe you do. B'meiziv v'yasru bei. Meiziv without asra, you're not dying. So maybe in that scenario, Yom Kippur will be mechaper, that carbon, or b'shoigeg v'yasyadalei, or b'shoigeg, and you didn't know. So it's shoigeg, you didn't know you're camping a carbon. Maybe the carbon of Yom Kippur would be mechaper. Therefore, you need to tell me, like Rabbi Yehuda, mitumais, like Rabbi Shimon, that is chibur al kodesh. Each one you needed a limud to teach me. No. Only tumas mikdash kedashav. Guys, you hear the style. You needed a limud to tell me not this. Why? No. Next. Gilei Arayos, the same Gemara. Gilei Arayos nami hechi dami, Amid Aleph. Ibn Mezid bar Katalu. It's Gilei Arayos, depending on what area you did. It can be as severe as Sreifa, as little as Chenek. Ibn Shoigeg bar Carbon who. So why do you need Yom Kippur? What havamina do you need that Yom Kippur is going to be mechaper? On that, the Gemara says, Mezid the same teretz, Mezid v'yasra, b'shoigeg v'yasyadalei. In that case, you're not going to bring a carbon. In that case, you're not going to die. So I needed to tell me that this carbon is not mechaper. It's only mechaper for Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. I'm pretty quick with that. Shvichas damim, hechi dami, b'mezid bar katolahu, b'shoigeg. If you kill someone b'shoigeg, bar golasu, he goes to golus. So mimanavshach, why do you need a limud to teach me that it's not mechaper for shvichas damim? Of course it's not. Says Gemara, a similar teretz. B'meiziv le'yasru bei, b'shogeg v'leyisyadale inami b'hanach delab b'nei galus ninu. Every shogeg goes to galus, guys. What happens if you go derech aliyah? You're going up, right? I'm saying no, it's not. What happens if you you shoot the gun and the guy sticks his head out right after the fact? So in other words, in those scenarios, you might think that that you need Yom Kippur mechapik because it says Tuma and Shvikas Dam is called Tuma. Kemash Malon mi Tumas like Rabbi Yehuda, Mechipa Lekodesh like Rabbi Shimon. That no, only Tumas Mikdash Kedashim, not those three. So we dealt with the first part of the brisa. Amamar, continuing the brisa. That's why we went over today. Amamar, continuing the brisa. Yachol al sholish Tumas halalu yehesei mechaper tamid loymar mi Tumois v'loy kol Tumois. Mamatzinu. This is Rabbi Yehuda's limud, right? What do you find? It says mi tumois, only some tumas, but not all tumas. Meaning a tuma, but not all. Mamatzinu shechalik hakosev, a unique din mechlal kol tumois betumas mikdash kedashav, just like you find there by tumas mikdash kedashav, afkan betumas mikdash kedashav. So this is unique. This is unique, as we're going to see that the kohen is being mechapa for you. You're not being, guys, you're not being a carbon. It's a carbon seaboard being mechapa for a yachid. That's a unique din. So just like we have this kula over here that the kohen's bringing a carbon seaboard for you, so too it must be the unique din is the din in oil of yared, which is a kula, which is good. Says Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Fred Gemara. My cholik, what's the uniqueness about Tumash Mitzvah Kadashav? The Maisi Oil of yared, you're going to bring, depending upon your financial status, you're going to bring a carbon. Ema avodah zara. Maybe it's avodah zara. Uma cholak. What does cholak mean? Siman avodah zara. Yoledz mitzvah nazir. The ma'isi seira veloy kispa. Guys, all I needed what is a unique din. Cholak means unique. So, guys, look at me. The Yom Kippur carbon is unique. The other one that's going to be similar, that it's going to happen for, is unique. We're saying the uniqueness is the oil of yared of what? Of Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. I have a uniqueness of Avodah Zarah. What's the uniqueness? If you bring a carbon, you do a chatas, you can bring a sheep, a ewe, E-W-E, or a female goat. I don't know what a female goat is called. A goatette. Whatever. But when you avoid the Zarah, you can only bring a sira. You only bring a sira. And that's unique. So maybe Einachinami, it's not for Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. Maybe it's for what? For Avodah Zarah, because it's cholak, it's unique. Says the Gemara, Rav Kahana, Anan cholak lahokal karminon, v'hai chokal lahachmir. Guys, as we said, the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is a tremendous kula. It's not costing you anything. It's Siva's carbon, right? The oil of yared is the kula. Depending upon your financial status, you may be able to bring a small carbon. Let's say, you know what, you want to bring a sheep, because sheeps are $5. And goats, there's a run on goats, and there's not enough goats around. It may cost you $25. So it's a chumrah when they go ahead and say you have to bring a goat. So therefore, I can't go ahead and say Avodah Zarah is comparable to what? To Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is Zichar Kula. Oil of yared is Zichar Kula. Avodah Zarah is not a Kula. Mamela, it makes more sense to say it's speaking about Oil of yared of Tumas Mikdash Kedashav rather than Avodah Zarah. Okay, very geschmack. Now we're going to go through different places with the same kasha. Same kasha. It says the Gemara, the Ema Yoledes, the Chalak. What's unique about a Yoledes? The Maisi Oil of yared. She brings the carbon Oil of yared. So in other words, if Yom Kippur would go by and the Yoledis did not bring her carbon, then the Seir that was done inside would get her off the hook. You're telling me that what? You're telling me that what? It's for Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. As we'll see, it doesn't get you off the hook totally. It's only puts you in a state of suspended animation. Maybe a Yoledes who didn't get a chance to bring her kabbanis. Maybe what? And it's a kula, because what? It's oil of yared. So your teretz of being a chumrah by avodah zarah is not going to work. Over here, it's a kula, and let's say that speaking where she didn't bring it, she not bring it on Yom Kippur before Yom Kippur, and therefore says the Gemara Rabbi Shia, it says v'chiper el hakodesh mitumas bnei Yisrael mifnei l'chol chatay sam v'loy l'chol tumasam. Why is she being a carbon? because she's tamei. She's not bringing a carbon because she sinned. This carbon that you're bringing is for a chait. It's a chatas. It's a sin offering. It's a sin. It's a say. It's a chatas. It's a seir nasa bifnim, fellas. So the kapara it must be bringing for the kapara it must be bringing for must be what? It must be similar to avodah zara. Excuse me, similar to Yom Kippur. Achatas. The yoledes is not bringing a carbon for a chait. The yoledes is bringing a carbon because she's tamei. So memela, it doesn't make sense to say that it's mechaber for an yoledes. Fred the Gemara, Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the Amar yoledes nami choy tasi ma'yikle meimar. Now Reb Shimon is a Shimon by Yochai, and he has a shita. You know why a woman brings a chatas yoledes? Because when she's in child's birth, she's going to go ahead and swear not to live with her husband again, because he's the one who put her in this predicament in the first place by getting her pregnant. So therefore, like Rav Shimon, what are you going to say? You can't tell me it's what it's for tuma because it's for the chatas. So therefore, let me say the following: it checks off the boxes. A, it's a chatas because you did an avera. B, it's a kula. So maybe the seir hanasa b'fnim is mechaper for a yoledes who didn't bring a carbon. And for the Gemara, Rav Shimon l'tamei, the amami mimkomo hu muchra regeshmak. Guys, he doesn't learn the Memetzino. He learns from the plain Pasha Gered Pasik. It says v'chibar ala kodesh. In other words, he doesn't need the dimyu to tumah of achatas. He doesn't need any of that. He says the Pasik says v'chibar ala kodesh mitumas from tumas kodesh memelu geshmak. So Rav Shimon who holds guys. Rav Shimon Taka holds the yoledes is what is a chayta, but he doesn't come on to that limit of chatasam. He has it from the pasuk itself. Fred the Gemara ve'ema mitzayra. Maybe the seir nasa b'fnim is being mechaper for a mitzayra who didn't bring before Yom Kippur, didn't bring his kabbanis. Rabbi Yeshua says Rabbi Yeshua l'chol chatoisam v'lei l'chol tamasam. The same teretz that l'chayra the mitzayra is bringing his kabbanis because he's tamei. And we have a limud l'chol chatoisam. It's not a chatas. Well, Rav Shimon bar Nachmani the Amar al shiva devarim negoyim boyim. 7 things the Gemara in Erechim tells us negoyim kam. The most famous guys lashon hara. Most famous lashon hara. Right, gaiva, murder. There's a bunch of reasons. So in other words, so therefore what, guys? Let's go through it. A, you're a chayta. You're a chayta because that's how you end up in the first place. And B, it's also mitzayres oil of yori, guys. Mitzvah is also every year. The boxes, you check the boxes off, right? The mela, maybe it's mechaper from mitzvah. How do you know Tumas Mikdash Kodashov? So Ma'ik Lemeimar says the Gemara Chasam Negia the Chaperle. There it's the Nageha. It's hard Nagia. Nageha. It's a kretz. It's the mitzvah. It's a ras that is mechaper. The carbon l'shterui b'kahal, and that's it's mechusah kippurim. It allows you to go ahead and come back into join the Klal Yisrael. So therefore, it's not a chait. If it's not a chait, even if it is a chait, nonetheless, in the goyim, the reason the kapara is not the carbon, the kapara is the actual fact that you were perishing the tzibah, that you were badad yeshev chutz lamachane. Okay, so that's why mitzvah not. Fred the Gemara ve'eman nazir tamei. Okay, now a nazir that's tamei brings karbanis as well, and the oil of yared. So then that's not a nazir tire, guys. Nazir became tamei, and this is it stops his naziris, and he has to start again. Before he starts again, he has to bring 3 karbanis. One of them is an oil of yared. So therefore, you have a kula of oil of yared, and it's a different tumah, and it's tumah. The cholek, the maisi toirim b'nei yoina, that you can bring mat, you can bring oil of yared, you can bring birds. Ravoshia l'chol chataisam v'lo l'chol tumasam. For chatas not tumah, and nazir l'chayri is tamei. Or a nazir hakaper dam and nazir nami chayta hu ma'ik l'meima. A nazir is a chayta. What are you going to say? A nazir, he went ahead. Kadosh Baruch Hu asks enough thing on you that you don't have to go ahead in. He was mitzvah himself from wine, right? He's mitzvah himself from wine, so he's called a chayta. Let's see twice this in a second. So obviously he must hold like Reb Shimon, like the one that the reason why Nazir is not brought in, even though it checks the boxes. It's oil of yared, it's tumah, it's chatas, It's chatas, not tumah. It's chatas or leviyared. And the reason you don't bring it in because we don't bring the limit from chatas. We bring it from the chipa el kodesh. Let's see Taisus, guys. Rabbi Elazar kaped Amar nasa chaytahu. Vim taimar. V'holei ikri chayta el lefi shetzir atzam min hayayin. V'hasoyer ein a bola chaper el al tumah. No, but what's your teretz? What's your kasha, guys? Look, eye contact. You wanna we want to say like Rabbi Yehuda, it only comes machmas chait and not machmas tumah. So we answered. You said nazir, maybe it's mechaper for nazir tumah nasal nuflim. No, chait, and that's tumah because it's nazir tumah. Fred the Gemara. What about Lorazar Kappa who says what you're chayta? But the chayta has nothing to do with tumah. The reason you're chayta is because you went ahead and you masked yourself from wine. So it's not a good teretz. It's not a good teretz. It's going to extend. In other words, your initial naziris went ahead. Why, guys? The achet was the original naziris that you accepted naziris. Now you get. Let's say you're in day 29. Stam naziris is shleishim yom. You're day 29, and now you contract tumah. You're putting yourself out again. So that extension of the tumah that you won't be able to drink wine for a longer period of time. We have a sushtel to chait and tumah. Guys, here. In other words, good, you're tumah, but the act of tumah gufa itself is going to go ahead, what? And make me not drink wine for longer. Therefore, it's okay. So Mamela, we've exhausted different possibilities, whether by the Zari, Yoledis, Mitzvah, and Nazir. None of them is Tumas Mikdash Kedushav. None of them is the Seir Nasim Ifnim Mechaper for. It's Mechaper for Tumas Mikdash Kedushav. Good. Okay. You know what we don't know? We don't know, or we do know, and we have to challenge. How do you know it's for that you knew that you yediyah, but not b'saif? So we know which avera. We don't know the scenario of it. We know it's tumas mitzvah shekadashav, but now it can't be that yediyah halama yediyah because then you're a bar carbon, right? Then you're a bar carbon. So what we need to do, fellas, is figure out how do you know it's speaking Yediyah in the beginning and not in the end, rather than Yediyah. Good. Says the Omamar, going back over the Bryce again. Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon says, Mimekaimai hu muchra. You don't need to come onto the memetzino of the uniqueness of the Kohen Yom Kippur and the uniqueness of the Oil of Yored. From the pasuk itself, I know. Again, I can't stress enough. This is the pasuk we're hacking, guys. Here we go. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumos, says Rabbi Shimon. What is the mechaper for? On tumah of kodshim. There it is. Okay, I'm going to keep this on the board. Harioime v'chiper ala kodesh mitumas shel kodesh. L'chayra, says the Gemara, Shapik Rav Shimon. L'chayra Rav Shimon is saying very good. No, it's Rabbi Yehuda is coming onto this exotic memetzino, correct? Who needs this exotic memetzino? State mefurish and pasuk azay, right? What do you need? There it is in front of you. Rabbi Yehuda Amalach, Hahumi boile ki hechi da avid lefnai lefnim hachi navid behechal. Right? What does Rabbi Yehuda do with this with memetzino? For the following. Okay, I'm gonna have to. I got to see you when I tell you this. Okay, the Yom Kippur process is there are two karbonis that go inside, the par and the sayer, and you're going to do the exact same thing. Inside the kacheh kedoshim, you're going to spritz achas l'mayla v'zayin lamata. You're going to spritz achas shtayim like this in front of the aron. You're going to come out and then sprinkle in front of the proiches. Good. It doesn't say that you sprinkle. It says it's alluded to, but it doesn't say what you do outside. So it says over Rabbi, he uses it for the following. It says, this is what Rabbi Yehuda uses it for. Says Rabbi Yehuda, you went inside, you spritzed inside. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumas b'nei Yisrael. You should be mechaper ala kodesh, meaning in front of the paroiches, the same way you did it inside. The same way you did it inside, you should do it outside. The same way you did it inside, you should do it outside. That's what it's coming to teach me. The same way you do it inside, that's how you should do it outside. Good? That's what he's saying. Now, continues the Gemara. For Reb Shimon, how does Reb Shimon know that? What does the pasuk say, guys? V'chein yaseh la'oil moyed. So too you should do for the oil moyed. Just like you spritz the blood inside of the seir, so too you should spritz it in front of the oil moyed. Right? So he knows, therefore he has v'chiper al kodesh extra. Reb Yehuda, imeahi, if it would say v'chein yaseh oil moyed, havamina nesi par b'seir achrina v'nevad. I would think, guys, what? If you learn from the Chen Yasel Oil Mayed, I would say the following. You bring, just like inside you bought a bull and a goat, so too you should bring another bull and a goat and do it outside. The Chen Yasel Oil Mayed, the same way you do inside, you should do outside. Therefore, I need V'chip El HaKodesh to teach me know that you Mechap El HaKodesh with the same blood that you used inside. For Reb Shimon, why is Reb Shimon not bothered by that? The Chen Yasel Oil Mayed Minei. It says that he learns it out. So you should do may oil moed minei mashma from the word minei from it, meaning from the oil moed from minei from it itself, and not from the itself, the one that was used inside, and not what a whole new pair. Okay, so that is the machloikis between Rav Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. What does each one do with the own pasuk? What they didn't like about each other? And now we arrive at the moment of truth. How do you know it's speaking about a carbon that you knew in the beginning and forgot in the end? Again, Yedi in the beginning, just to remind you, is that what? You learned in yeshiva that what if you're tameh, you can't go into the Beis Hamikdash. If you're tameh, you can't eat kachim. Amamar. Yochal al kol tumois shebekodesh yesar zemechaper tameloima mipisheihem l'chol chataysam. It says mipisheihem from your mezid l'chol chataysam. Okay, now you're telling me that you need a pasuk to teach me that what? That this is mechaper for what? For something similar to mezid. Now, what else could it be mechaper for, fellas? Guys outside, look at me. Please look at me. Please look at me. Can it be mechaper for no yedi in the beginning? Why? Because if there's no yedi in the beginning, can't be mechaper for that, right? Good. Can it be mechaper for your yedi in the beginning and a yedi in the end? No, because I have the carbon oil of for that. So memela, it's got to be that when it says mipishayim without a carbon, you know what carbon it must be? The one where you have yedi in the beginning and you can't bring a carbon. It must be that. It must be that. Says the Gemara, Amamar, Yochal kol tumas shebekodesh yisar zemechaper mekamalayimar mipishayim l'chol chatoisam. Ma'ininu, what is that? Yesh bo yediyah betchil v'yesh bo yediyah b'soif. Haibar carbon who? You're bringing carbon out of the yared. So it can't be that what it's speaking about. So al karchuk has to be speaking about what? No yedi in the beginning and the end. Fred the Gemara. So why do I need a pasuk, guys? Why do I need a pasuk to tell me? In other words, obviously, it has to be the case where you can't bring a carbon. Fellas, I don't need a pasuk. Didn't I just tell you from the inference? Guys, we used logic to figure out the only possible scenario is a yediyah in the beginning and no yediyah in the end. Because if you got a yediyah but both, it's got its own carbon. If you have no yediyah, if you have no yedi in the beginning, even if you have one in the end, there's no carbon. So al karchim must be speaking about yedi in the beginning. So why do we need a pasuk? That's the Gemara's kasha. You know what the Gemara's teretz is, guys? I would think it's speaking about both. This is not a Texas Longhorn. This is a yedi in the beginning and a yedi in the end. Okay, Lenny, I know you're going to get the Texas Longhorns in there. No, this is yedi in the beginning and this is yedi in the end. Right now, why would you think that I has its own carbon? Says the Gemara. No, here's what happened. You didn't get a chance to bring your carbon oil of Yori before Yom Kippur. Your taka figured out that, you know what, you were in the Beis HaMikdash, you had a yediyah, or that you had kachim, you had a yediyah, but when it's late, if it's late, why can't Erev Yom Kippur, you can't bring a carbon, shkiyas achama. So you might think that therefore that this sayer is mechaper for that scenario and not the scenario of a yedi in the beginning and not a yedi in the end. Kamashma in the pasuk, no, it's speaking about a yedi in the beginning and not in the end. So I needed that. In other words, again, the kash and the teretz, the kash and the teretz. Why do I need a pasuk to teach me that this sayer nasa b'fnim is mechaper for what? A case of no carbon. I don't need a pasuk for that because man of shach. If there's no carbon at all, right? If there is a carbon, so what do I need it for? It must be a case where the possibility exists for a carbon. What's that case? Yedi in the beginning. So why do I need the pasuk? And for the Gemara, because I could have another scenario. I could have a scenario where Yedi at beginning, Yedi in the end. And so why aren't you bringing your carbon? It's too late. Mamish, you figured it out. Mamish shkia. So you might think that the seir nasa b'fnim is mechaper for that. Kamash Malanda, no, it's mechaper for what? It's mechaper for Yedi in the beginning and no Yedi in the end. Very, very geshmach Gemara. Okay, good. Sakadat Ramina, Adamaisi, Amid Beis, Nitnale, right? Until what? Until you get a chance to bring the Olav Yored. This Seir Nasim Nim will protect someone who had a Yedi in the beginning, Yedi in the end. Kamashmal on the Pasuk, it's speaking about what? It's speaking a Yedi in the beginning and not a Yedi in the end. Guys, Geshmak? So as we went through piecemeal, went through each shita, we went through the scenarios of what Yehudish Memetzinu, Shimon the pasuk itself, Achipar LaKodesh, what each one did with the other one. Al Karchach Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, not Avodah Zarah, Mitzayra, Yoledes, and Nazir. None of that. It's Zichah Tumas Mikdash Kedashav. We figured out that also it has to be speaking about what Yedi in the beginning with no Yedi in the end. Because of the pasuk and Peshem is mazid. The chata is similar to that. You can't bring a carbon. It must be not that you can't bring a carbon at all. It must not be that you can bring a carbon later on when you find out. Yom Kippur should protect you. It's speaking about what? It's speaking about Yediyah with no, not in the beginning, but not in the end. Amamar minayin sheyesh bo Yediyah b'tchila ve'ein bo Yediyah b'soif sheseya zet toila. How do you know you have Yediyah in the beginning and Yediyah in the end? That it's toilet. What the Mishnah say? It protects you, and then when you find out, you'll bring your carbon oil be irate. It protects you, and then when you find out, you'll bring your carbon oil be irate. Minayin, how do you know that? My kom kashale. What's the kasha? Hachik kashale. Hashta the amrit chatoyim dumya de b'shoam ma b'shoyim de lav b'nei kapora av chatoyim nami de lav b'nei kapora ema ma b'shoyim de lav b'nei kapora la'olam av chatoyim de lav b'nei kapora la'olam. Right? Maybe it's speaking where you have no kapara at all from a carbon. Maninu, ain ba yediyah b'tchila, v'yesh ba yediyah b'soif. In other words, guys, I could say the following. A comparison. Pishayim to chatasam. Pishayim, mazid. Does a mazid bring a carbon? Absolutely not. Okay? Your assumption is that therefore it must be that what? That must be Yedi in the beginning, Yedi in the end, where he's not going to bring a carbon because it has to protect him. Fred the Gemara, great kasha. Maybe this chatas, maybe it's the chol chatasam is similar to Pesheim, where you can never bring a carbon. A mesa never brings a carbon. What happens if you didn't know in the beginning? You didn't know in the beginning, and you found out in the end. Well, I know one thing. If I didn't know in the beginning, we know by now at the end of this year, you don't know in the beginning, you ain't bringing a carbon. So maybe that's the case. So Fred the Gemara Kasha, guys, why do you say it's toila? Why do you assume that this guy, guys, what does toila mean? The possibility exists to bringing a carbon later on down the line. I'm in a state of suspended animation till I find out later. When I find out later, then I'll bring it. Maybe it's speaking about similar to a mazid where you never could bring it. It's so beautiful, the Zushtel. Mazid doesn't bring a carbon, period. Maybe here it also doesn't bring a carbon, period. You know what the answer is? It has to be the possibility that you will bring a chatas. Therefore, it can't be speaking where you didn't have a day in the beginning. It has to be the possibility that where you could bring a chatas. That's the limit. Okay, it's Fred a great kasha. One more time. Amamar. Minayin from the top of the page. Minayin sheyesh b'yediyah b'tchila and b'yediyah b'soif. How do you know it's speaking about that scenario? Shasei is a toila that this sayer is going to suspend you. Minayin, Micah Kasha. What's your question? Hachi Kasha. Here's the Kasha. Hashda the Amrit Chatoyim Dumi the Pishayim the Pisham. Now you're comparing it to what the Pesha. Ma Pishayim the Labnei carbon. Just like Pesha, you're not making carbon because the Mason never brings the carbon. Av Chatoyim so to Chatoyim also Nami the Labnei carbon. Ema ma Pishayim the Labnei carbon la'olam. Av Chatoyim the Labnei carbon la'olam. And what does that mean? When are you never going to bring a carbon? Oh, in the end you found out you did it, but you never knew. You were tinik shenishbar, guys. You were tinik shenishbar. You never knew the halacha, and now showing you came wise and you found out. Guess what? Too late, honey. Right? As Nassim would say, it's too late. Right? In other words, but that would be more comparable to Bezid, right? Bezid doesn't bring lo'ilam. This doesn't bring lo'ilam. Memela, let's destroy a whole limud of what? That the sayer that's nasa bifnim is mechaper for yedi in the beginning and not a yedi in the end. Mamish, the Gemara is exhausting that this beautiful. Aval yesh ba yedi betchil v'en ba yedi b'soif kivin dechim misyadolei bar carbon who aim litly. Maybe it shouldn't be toila. In other words, right? Maybe it shouldn't be. V'chitema aim ba yedi betchil v'yesh ba yedi b'soif. If you have no dia in the beginning and you have one in the end, seir nasa b'chutz yom kippur mechaper. Guys, what kind of hafamina is this? Eye contact. If you go back to the first blot, go back to the Mishnah, but we're not going to do that. What does the first blot say? If you had a yediyah in the beginning and not in the end, the seir that's done inside is toila. If you don't have a yediyah in the beginning, but you do have a yediyah in the end, the seir nase b'chutz is mechaper. So how could you have havamina that what pisheya means never being a carbon, right? And this one is not toila. Since I have a carbon that deals with someone who didn't have a yediyah in the beginning, memela the seir that's nase b'fnim has to be speaking about when you did have a yediyah in the beginning. By the process of elimination, I got two karbonis. I got the seir that's done inside. I got the seir that's done outside. Your question is, how do you know the seir done inside? It's mechaper for yediyah in the beginning and not in the end. Maybe it's mechaper for what? For one that didn't have yediyah in the beginning at all, similar to Mezid. Says, how can you entertain that? I have the seir nasa b'chutz for that lack of yediyah. If that seir nasa b'chutz is lack of yediyah is going to take care of that, the mela must be the seir that's inside takes care of the yediyah in the beginning. That's what it says the Gemara. And for the Gemara, I'll tell you what I mean. Switch it around. In other words, if this is your source, Rabbi Sai, so Pishei means no carbon at all. Chataisa means no carbon at all. So Memela, what? Memela, it's speaking about someone who doesn't bring a carbon at all because he never had a yediyah. And Nase Bachutz, that'll be with the one yediyah in the beginning and not the yediyah in the end. On that, the Gemara answers, "Amakro l'chol chataysam nechal de b'nei chatas nenu." Okay, guys. What do you want to say? I wish I don't know how to underline. I know how to underline. Oh, here we go, guys. B'sheyem l'chol chataysam. I feel like I'm back in kindergarten. Guys, what did you want to say? You wanted to say mazid, no carbon, and therefore it's going to be, the scenario is going to be no carbon, which would be no yedi in the beginning. So why, when it says chatoisam, your sin, it must be that the possibility exists to come to a chatas. In other words, I have a choice. I can do one that where you don't have a yediyah at all, I can apply over here, or I can go put a bechutz. The one where you do have a yediyah, I can apply it over here, I can do a bechutz. It makes much more sense to say that this is speaking where you had a yediyah in the beginning. Because it says l'chol chatasam, it must be the possibility exists that you can come to a chatas. That's only when you had a yediyah in the beginning. If you didn't have a yediyah in the beginning, you can't come to a chatas. Memela, you wanted to say, apich mepich, switch it around. No, we're not switching around. This makes sense. Mishpeshayim is amazing, not a carbon. You know why I can't bring a carbon? Not because I can never bring a carbon, because I don't know right now to bring a carbon. And therefore, it'll be toilet till later time I find out. That's the maskana. That's the bottom line. Now it's toila, right? We said it's toila. Why doesn't it mechaper kapara gemura? For gemura, when it's kapara gemura, let it be mechaper a complete kapara. Why did the Mishnah say? In other words, the Gemara now is accepted and learned out what the Mishnah stated, that the Seir Nasa B'fnim is mechaper for an Aveira where you had a Yedi in the beginning and not in the end. Great. But the Mishnah then said it's toila until you find out. Why don't you say it's mechaper kapara gemura? That's it. Iksiv meichatasam. If it would have said meichatasam, mashma, it's. I just keep on going back to this. Guys, watch. V'chiper ala kodesh mitumas b'nei Yisrael u'mipishayhem. It's mechaper for kodesh tumas b'nei Yisrael u'mipishayhem meichatasam. If it would have said l'chol meichatasam from all their averis, I would have said it's mechaper. Kidduka amrit. Hashid d'chsiv l'chol chatasam lahanich de'as l'kal chatas. It's mechaper for one, right? It's mechaper for one that can come to chal chatas. Good, and the seir batchila the aim b'soif. It's hashid d'chsiv l'chol chatasam lahanich de'as l'chal chatas. One that's come to the category of chatas, meaning one that you're going to bring a chatas from, meaning you have your D in the beginning, your D at the end. If it would, it says Mepshem l'chol chatasam, right? It says Mepshem l'chol chatasam. If it said, I'm trying to figure this out. If it would have said Mepshehem, I would have said it's mechaper. It's mechaper. But now that it says l'chol chatasam, I'm going to say that what? That it's not mechaper. It's only toila. I'm going to say it's not mechaper. That what? It's only what? It's only. In other words, look, when it says l'chol chatasam, it's mashma from the lashon hakol, the one that you'll bring a chatas in the end. It's mechaper again. The key word being this word, guys. If it would have said mechatasam, you're right. It says l'chol chatasam, from any carbon that will, from any averi that will lead to a carbon. Not that you mechayiv the carbon now, it'll lead to a carbon later on. What's the case of leading to a carbon later on? Is Yediyah in the beginning and not in the end. And Memela, I know it's Toila. I know from then it's Toila. Fred the Gemara, V'chi me'acha she'ena mechaper lama Toila. What? Guys, why does this thing Toila? Memanashach. You either got a kapara or you didn't get a kapara. What does that mean? In other words, Toila, what's the Toila for? What is it accomplishing? Obviously, it's accomplishing something. What is it accomplishing? What is it accomplishing? Says the Gemara. Says the Gemara. I'll tell you what. Amar Rabbi Zeira loymar shemeis meis b'layavin. If the guy never got a chance to go ahead and find out that he was tamei to bring the carbon oil of yored, and he dies in that state, this carbon will be mechaper. This carbon will be mechaper. Good. Say the Gemara. Amalei Rava in meis misam emerikas. If he dies, he doesn't need this carbon to mechaper. His death is mechaper. You don't need the. What are you telling me? That what's the purpose of bringing this carbon? That in case he dies, he should get off the hook. His death gets him off the hook. You don't need the carbon. So the Gemara then, if Ella Amarava lahagin elav minay yisurim. Even though what he didn't know about the chait, the person has to worry about yisurim that comes as a result. When a person does a chait, we know he creates malachim that are negative, makachugim. You need protection. So you know what this carbon does? It's like, guys, the asham tali. We learned the asham tali. A guy eats something, he doesn't know what, he doesn't know what it is. Is it chaylev? Is it shumin? He brings an asham tali. What's the and if he finds out later it's chaylev, it means the chatas. So why is he bringing the asham tali? Is go ahead and protect him from yisurim. Who adin the Yom Kippur? This carbon will protect him from yisurim, and this carbon says, okay, Yotzim Dvarenu, we have a maskana. After a long-winded Gemara, we have a maskana that how we know it's speaking about Tumas Mikdash Kedashav, either because of the Mematzinu of uniqueness of Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Shimon learning often from the pasuk. We know it's speaking about what? It's speaking about Yediyah in the beginning. We need a pasuk to teach me that it's speaking about the Yediyah in the beginning and not Yediyah in the end, because you'd have a havmin. It's speaking about a yedi in the beginning and the end, but the end you find out right before Yom Kippur, and you don't have a chance to bring it. So you might think it protects you until you can bring it. Kamashma in the pasuk that no, the pishveihem mesa doesn't bring a carbon. This is bringing a carbon, and bringing a carbon when he finds out later. How do you know? Maybe it's speaking about a person who can't bring a carbon at all, right? Says the Gemara, we have the seir nasa b'chutz for that. For the Gemara, maybe the opposite. Maybe the seir that's done inside is for no aver. That's all. Maybe the other one is the chatzis b'chutz is for the person who come to an aver. It says the chol chatasam. And mainly, it's speaking about what a person who come to a chatas, which is where you have an aver in the beginning and not an aver in the end.